Hey, what's up YouTube? It's Steven with Rabbit Hobbies, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make simple, great-looking dungeon bases for your miniatures, suitable for Dungeons & Dragons, Age of Sigmar, Hero Quest, etc. I'm also going to go over some basics on how to prepare miniatures for painting for new painters, but if you already know that stuff and you want to just get right to the bases, feel free to skip to that part of the video. This is a video that I started making a while ago, and I just recently decided to finish it up and get it posted. As always, thanks for watching. So this is the kind of result you can expect to get from this tutorial. They're pretty simple and effective. They come together very quickly. And it's a very beginner-friendly technique that you can use to easily get a full board game based up, like Hero Quest, for example, or Minions for Dungeons & Dragons. Now, they're not going to win you a Slayer sword at Golden Demon, but I think they look pretty good for the amount of time invested.
So in front of me here, I have the first expansion set for Hero Quest. I've already painted my initial set, so let's pick out a monster to use to do this quick basing tutorial. This female orc should do just fine for our purposes here. But first things first, we're going to want to clean her up. The Hero Quest minis come with some pretty significant mold lines, basically where the two sides of the mold come together to get these miniatures put together. You can see it there on the base rim. A bit of her on her foot is pretty severe. There's a bit on her thigh as well that I kind of did off camera later. Let's take care of those. You're going to need some tools for this. My favorite go-to tools are going to be these little disposable files. These diamond files, well, tend to be a little hard for Hero Quest miniatures. If you're working with a hard resin, those are good, but we'll put that out for now. But these little twigs, I like to use these on all kinds of miniatures. Really cheap and easy. Most hobby stores will have them, but I like to buy them in bulk on Amazon. This was the pack that I picked up, I think, for about $10, so a pretty great value. I also always have a nice sharp hobby knife available. You're going to use not only the tip, but you can also use the back end of the knife to scrape mold lines off. So it is really invaluable tools for us to have. So let's go ahead and get cracking and remove some mold lines from this mini. So first I'm going to start with that kind of egregious bit on her heel, and I'm going to start carving that away gently until I can see just the rim that needs to be filed away. So yeah, a great big hunk of flash that had to get removed from this miniature. Use my fingernail to kind of scrape it, and then I'm going to come in here with a sanding stick, and I use that sanding stick just to kind of even out everything. So that bulk pack that I picked up has many different grit options for different finishes and for different things you're removing. And here I'm going to get the base rim to kind of smooth it down. I don't want that to show up after painting. And once it feels really smooth, that's going to paint well. It's not going to show up if there's any discoloration here. Don't worry about that. As long as you get it nice and smooth, it will not show up once you've primed and painted your miniature, so don't worry about that. Next, we need to make sure that we get these nicely washed and ready to paint so our primer will stick. Now, these miniatures come with some mold release agent on them, so what I'm doing here is I have 2 containers of water, one very hot and one cold, and some Dawn dish soap. I put a little bit of Dawn dish soap in my cold water bath, and I'm going to use the hot water bath to fix any warping on these miniatures. I'll give it a quick stir with my toothbrush just to mix up the Dawn in my cold water bath. And we're going to take a look at her, and she's got a bent weapon, which is pretty common. These Hero Quest minis are kind of gummy, so I'm dumping her into the hot water. And now I'm going to bend the weapon back into place, and I'm going to dunk her in the cold water, which will actually help the miniature kind of freeze in the position you're looking for. One more quick look to make sure she's looking nice. And then she's going to go in the bath, and I'm going to give her a really good scrub. I'm speeding up the footage here, so you have to watch me scrub this girl. But scrub her really good all over and get that mold release off, and she'll be ready to dry off so we can prime her. Now you can just sit back and let her air dry. But if you have access to an airbrush, this is something that I like to do. You could also use a hairdryer, just use the cold setting because you don't want to end up warping her. But I use my airbrush and just kind of blow off the excess moisture here to get her ready to prime. Obviously, we're not going to want to prime a wet miniature, but here she is all dry and ready to go. Now for the base, you're going to need some cardstock. Now I use this leftover packaging from a Xbox battery pack. And we're going to take some scissors and we're going to cut this into little strips. But any packaging that you find that's like this would be perfectly suitable for it. Don't use corrugated cardboard that's going to absorb moisture. It's going to be hard to work with. You want just kind of packaging material is great. You can buy cardstock, but you may as well just recycle what you have lying around. And as you see here, I'm just going to cut it into strips. And then I'm going to take those strips and I'm going to cut those strips into little tiny squares. And this is going to make the tiles of our dungeon floor. And you can cut some of these irregular. At the end here, I actually cut one kind of in half to use to kind of fill in gaps or small places. Make sure you have a lot of variability here. We're going to assume this is like stonework floor, not really high grade. If we got orcs making these things, yeah, they're not going to be paying attention to measurements. Just rough and ready floors, cobblestone. Now I usually make these in bulk, a lot at a time, so I need to have some nice place to store them. I use these condiment cups that you can pick up on Amazon. I use them for a lot of things actually. If I'm like mixing together texture paste or if I'm mixing together pigments, they're great. So here we are, we have all of our tiles put away and ready to go for basing our minis. Just seal that thing up and put it aside, store it for later if you're only doing one. So for now, let me grab my orc and we'll go ahead and get started with the process of building these tiles on the dungeon floor. So what I use for this to glue these tiles down is actually super glue or CA glue. Some people use PVA glue like Elmer's, but I find that it peels off the surface and it doesn't hold very well. This also kind of absorbs into the cardstock slightly and it makes a pretty strong bond. So go ahead and get your pieces glued down here. I use a little thin applicator and I grab with a pair of tweezers. If you're comfortable with your fingers, go ahead, but I don't like getting super glue right down my fingers. I usually just place these tiles kind of randomly around the miniature. Just take care that you don't put it up on her feet. You don't want to make her look like she's sinking into the floor. So what we're going to do with some texture is kind of make it look like she's sitting on the floor rather than part of it or sunk down. You could go and clip them off. I've seen people do that where they clip the minis off and then base that way, but I'm trying to make this a quick process, so I don't really do that here. I just build the tiles up, put the texture down. Don't worry about fitting your tiles on the base. You actually want that overhang because we're going to clip that off in the next step. So it's important for the floor to look somewhat seamless that you overhang the edges a bit. And here we are. I'm pressing it down, making sure that everything's nice and glued on there. And I'm going to grab my pair of trusty clippers. And you're going to treat this almost like you're trimming your finger or toenails. Just going around the edge and follow the edge of that base. And keep following that base rim until you have everything kind of rounded out and smooth. Here we are, looking pretty good, ready to go for the texture step. I like to use Vallejo Earth Texture. You can pick this up on Amazon. They have a few different colors available, different textures, but I prefer for my dungeon bases this dark earth. I've also used some of these effects for mud, for Deathcore of Krieg, for Warhammer. It's awesome and easy to use. I can't recommend it enough. So grab a cheap brush, definitely not one of your nice expensive brushes because we're going to be using this texture and it can be kind of rough on the bristles. You don't want to get that down in the ferrule, the metal part, and it can kind of ruin your point. So cheapest brushes you have, almost your throwaway brushes or stirring brushes I use. Then grab a little dab of the texture paint and we're just going to start to paint in between these tiles. You don't have to be super accurate. I'm just going to kind of mush it on top. However, do be careful not to get any of it on the legs or feet of the miniature while you're working on it. That can kind of ruin the effect, unless it's what you're going for, like muddy, chunky boots on a Death Corpsman, wading through, that might make sense. But for the most part of these orcs, I don't really want to have chunky texture on their legs. So for the next bit, we're going to be removing, so this is kind of a subtractive process. I'm going to be using makeup sponges to wipe away the excess. I prefer not to use Q-tips for this next part. I use these little cheap disposable makeup sponges I got off Amazon. Q-tips can leave around little stringy bits. So this next part is kind of subtractive. We added a bunch of things on and now we're taking away to get our final effect. Wiping away from the miniature, taking care not again to brush any grit on the legs, but these things work a treat. They're wonderful for oil washes, which I may show some tutorials on later. So now we're ready to prime our orc. I use these cheap stirring sticks that you can get from your local hardware store. I got these from Lowe's near me, but whoever supplies paint near you will probably have them. And I use some poster tack, just some non-permanent adhesive. This should be part of your arsenal. If I have to work with non-magnetized bases, this is my preferred method to stick things down to my painting sticks as well. So we got to get out and get priming to make sure that our paint can stick to these minis. As you can see, she's not going anywhere. And you can fit a lot of minis on one stick, even go double-sided if you want. So my preferred primer that I use for cheap applications is this Rust-Oleum. The specific one is their 2X Painter's Touch Ultra Cover Flat. So now that we're ready to prime, you want to make sure that you stay about 10 inches away. And you want to use short, controlled bursts. We don't want to clog up any detail, and this primer comes out pretty fast. Now don't worry if the finish looks a little odd at first. It will shrink some, but it's important that you make sure you have something for the paint to adhere to. Otherwise, especially with a gaming piece, the paint's going to flake off. So here we are with our finished orc. She's all dried, the magic of video editing, and she looks pretty good. Don't worry if there's a little bit on the base that the texture kind of blocked the primer. We're going to paint over that, and it won't have any trouble sticking to that. But we pulled her off, and we've got her basically ready to paint. At this point, I just take her and stick her on one of my paint handles and get her ready to go. These paint handles are something that I learned about watching Brent over at Goobertown Hobbies. If you do not watch Brent already, definitely check him out. Awesome, soothing, kind of the Bob Ross of the miniature painting world. But here's our finished orc. She's ready to go. Can't really see the contrast all that well, but in a future tutorial, I'll show you the painting process, and you'll see how we get her looking like the rest of these HeroQuest minis with their finished painted bases. So I'm going to link the things that I've used today in the video description in case you're interested in trying this out. Let me know in the comments if there's any other tutorials or content you'd like to see from me. Like, comment, and subscribe, and check out these completed bases. I have a lot on my hobby bench at the moment, including some Tyranids, some Imperial Assassins for Warhammer, and a lot more HeroQuest if you're interested. And thank you so much for watching.